Welcome into the Thunder Basketball Universe presented by COOP Ale Works. It is that time of the NBA season. The quiet time. If you listen closely, you can kind of hear it. It's quiet around here. There's not much going on. It's that time of the NBA season where it's between Summer League and right at the start of training camp. So this is a time where guys go off, they do their own things, they look to make the most of whatever's left of their off season. And so we thought this would be a good time for us to explain to you what is happening during this time of year. And to help us do that, we have somebody who actually went through an NBA off season, Mr. Michael Cage himself, and our very dear friend. Mike, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. You and Nick, I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Mike, thanks for coming on. And as you know, basketball more and more every year has become a 12-month sport, 24/7. And for you, I'm just curious what your experience is now as a broadcaster and your role as this NBA has become so much more of a 12-month sport compared to what it was like when you were a player.
Well, I think first of all, the science part of the game is what's going to happen now. Mm-hmm. I think the league teams do a good job of telling the players what are their weaknesses, measuring what their strengths are, going left, going right, conditioning. I think this is a time where you really start to work on it because for the young players coming in, they're still trying to catch their breath because of the draft, the pre-draft workouts, and then the summer leagues, the two summer leagues in Salt Lake City and Las Vegas. So this is their time to go, okay, I'm an NBA player now. I can go tell mom and we can sit back and relax for a second. But for a lot of the players, it's game on because we're talking next month, training camp start. We're talking a short window to get into shape because training camps now are a lot shorter. So when I played, we would have like a week-long two-a-days. That was brutal. Oof. They've cut that down, and I like that too because of the science and, the load management. So the training camp, really for coaches to work is just a 2 or 3 day period before preseason games start. Yeah. So when you talk about what do you need to do now, I remember, man, it's almost like you take maybe a week or two off right now, but you start quickly working on, your body, your what you think you need to work. This is your time to coach yourself is what I'm saying.
Right.
It's interesting because at the end of the season this year, Sam Presti pointed out 150 days. The team had 150 days of the offseason. We're about 2/3 of the way through that right now. And I'm curious, Mike, from your perspective, what would you, like, if you had 150 days in the offseason, how would you have divvied up that time as a player to make sure that you came back ready to go?
Well, if I was a young guy, I definitely would have played in the summer league because I played in the summer league 3 straight years. I got away with a third year.
There you go.
Because I liked it so much, and it was a lot of fun. It was in Los Angeles, all the 3 times I played. But you look at how that is for a young guy. What the Las Vegas Summer League, 11 days, 75 games, 439 players. All of the draft picks, the high picks, and the non-drafted players played this year. That's a wonderful, push ahead, if you will. You know what I mean? Because Nick, how you can, if you can get that kind of quality of play in, it really moves you along a lot quicker.
And I think a decade ago, the summer league, vibe and attitude was not as serious as it has been over the last 2-3 years. I think teams are taking it way, way more serious. All to your point, Michael, about some of the high impact players that are playing, guys coming back like Josh Giddey for a second year at Summer League. So you were just ahead of your time, as always, Michael, doing it 3 straight years.
Yeah, I got away with it, actually. Because they were saying, hey, you want to play again? And they said, oh, well, we forgot that this was your 3rd year. I said, well, I've already played 2 games, so I may as well finish. So
can't stop me now.
I finished the Summer League. And you look at, guys like you bring up Josh Giddey, Aaron Wiggins, getting that extra opportunity to be out there on the floor with the next incoming class. Because, so that's for the first-year players. For the guys like Shea, Darius, Lou Dort, I mean, that list goes on in terms of what they're getting ready for. I mean, they already know what they need to work on. It's more or less like, okay, I can't wait to get going because, they're like seasoned veterans. And I know, Bays has only been in the league 3 years, but he's a vet, and so he understands what, he's had a couple of off seasons to understand the time management. Right now, it's off time. It's half of that 150 days that you brought up, Lawson. But still, there's always an urgency in the, that there's like a yellow light flashing in the back of your head saying, look, I got to work on the stuff that I need to work on,
Right.
And I think that that's really important for guys to have that kind of time starting now until training camp, because once training camp start, man, you hit the ground running and you don't stop till next April.
I'm curious, Michael, because you talk about the work, right? Summer League is the work. That yellow flashing light, it's always going, that sense of urgency, like, all right, I've got work to do. But you also just came off, especially after that first year, a really brutal NBA season, very demanding, taxing NBA season. How do you balance the work with the downtime?
That's a good question. And I think for me, when I played, and just looking at the guys today, and I follow a lot of guys around the league too, not just our guys. You gotta listen to your body.
Yeah.
Just listen to it. And when I listen to it at my age, it's not saying anything. I'm saying, hey, come give me some feedback. I need something.
Talk to me.
Okay, it says give me 2 cups of coffee first, then we'll talk. But with these guys, I think like you talked, it's year-round basketball, and you really gotta kind of figure out, what's the time that I need to possibly work on some of those things that coaches left me with last spring. Because I think the NBA does such a good job of really, with their staff, their development, their training, their conditioning. And I like the fact that, the coaches for all the teams fly around.
Yeah.
Do they still do that at least once or twice?
Yeah.
Summer?
Yep.
Just to kind of touch base.
And the players organize their own workouts together,
Yeah.
All sorts of places. The guys were together in Las Vegas. And so, there's lots of opportunities like that.
And then, that brings to mind too, Nick, also, there's the various Pro-Am leagues around.
Yeah.
Right.
The Drew League,
Uh-huh.
Crawford's League in
Yep.
Seattle,
Right.
where you saw our guys playing in there. And that was pretty impressive.
Yeah, that was cool.
Watching that. Because Jamal Crawford has his own summer league in Seattle, and he does a good job of just bringing in a lot of the top talent as well as veteran players. But you got the Drew League, man. That's always been a big fun spot for me to watch, because that's where the older veteran players are showing up.
Right.
I saw LeBron James do a cameo
Sure
a couple
did.
of weeks ago.
Yeah.
So you can still see that these guys understand the importance of getting that kind of court time with quality players. So that, and I do mean quality players, so that you're not playing against a guy who's got nothing to lose and he ends up hurting you. Because you think about that when it's your choice to play in the Drew League or Jamal Crawford's league or the Rucker League, back in New York, which, you've seen some players play in. And that's one of the leagues that I think that's so powerful, because it's really an outdoor league. It's an old school league that's playing outside. So I enjoy that. And I think that's where those veteran players can really, what I would call sharpen their tools, because they say iron sharpens iron. And those leagues are where these players sharpen their irons from this point on until they start training camp next
And they
month.
can play completely freely. A totally kind of different style than what they might do in the league.
Yeah, I saw a play in Jamal Crawford's league last week with Chet throwing a lob, and it was a lob over to one guy who lobbed it backwards to the other. That's what let them have fun.
Well, and the environment of those things are so fun, right? And I just think back, because I my only frame of reference is what we did in college, and July in college basketball. It was terrible. It was not fun, right? We couldn't touch a basketball. It was all running. It was all conditioning. It was all lifting. And it was like to the point where like our old coach made a motto out of it. It was like, embrace the suck. Because this is the time where you're going to get better. Because when you can actually pick up a basketball, you're going to be stronger.
That's the reward.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's like, I want to play. I want to go shoot. I want to actually put this in action. So like, I can only imagine that could be a really fun way to keep moving your game forward.
Yeah, and don't feel bad about that, because all the way back in the 80s, I did not like that quiet period, because to me that meant coach is going to put the hammer on. He said, all right, you can't play basketball in July, but you can lift a weight, and you can run up and down those hills around San Diego or Nashville and all the other. I was like, well, man, no, please get rid of these quiet times. So,
Mike, do you remember an off season of yours that when you got done with the off season, you were like, I am so much better at this aspect of the game than I was to start the off season, and that you headed into the next season with a tangible skill difference or a tangible physical difference with yourself as a player?
I think it happened for me around year 4, where I really started to understand how to be a pro, that it wasn't always about what I was doing in front of the coaches. I learned to coach myself.
Yeah.
And that was really important, being able to say, hey, look, I want to work on this, and this is the time for me to work on it. I think that's where the maturity starts to kick in, where you start to take the leadership role on the team. You possibly become a captain around year 3 or 4 on the team, and you start to realize that, sometimes you have to go out there and set the table. You have to go out there and be that leader. And for me, it was definitely, that's a great question too, again, year 4, because I figured it out. I said, all right, I got 3 years in the books. I understand I don't need to be told all the time. I still need to be coached.
Right.
So I want, I think for players to be able to self-reflect, I think they start to figure it out around 3 or 4 years into the league where, all right, I don't need to be told that I can't just lay around for the next 2 weeks and do nothing and drink sodas and chips. When you start back, you're going to be hurt.
Right.
So
that lines up precisely with what Mark Daigneault told us at the end of season interviews, Paris. To basically, this time period, a guy like Darius Baisley heading into his 4th year, this is the opportunity for him to really take that ownership of his career. Not that the Thunder has been, is holding guys' hands for the first 3 years, but there's a little bit more structure and guidance in those first 3 years. And then once you head into that 4th year, it's a little bit different.
Yeah, I was curious too about that difference between the young year off seasons and the veteran year off seasons, because I imagine those look very different, in where you spend your off season, but also how you spend it and what you spend it doing.
Yeah, that's, really the 2 distinct, environments for a young player and a veteran player. Let's go with the young player. He's really taking it all in. And I think that's the advantage that a lot of players have today that I didn't have, is the amount of staff that's available to you to pick up the phone and call and say, hey, I want to work on this, or where can I get this? And it, all of a sudden, this wonderful thing called Amazon is on your front door. Gosh, I missed that boat. Because I would have been called, hey, I need...
So close, Mike. It's so close.
You won't believe how much stuff would have been piled in front of my door. But, that's where they are. And I think they understand that. For the veteran players, a lot of times those guys, they understand. They know what they need to do. And a lot of them have their own personal trainers in that part of the year, right? Where they start working with their own personal people. No insult to the staff or their respective teams. It's just that they have this guy who's really, only can work with him for this short window between now and the start of training camp. And they just get in the gym and they go to work, and you see that a lot. And that's where the veteran players understand, hey, look, this is my time to kind of prepare my body for training camp, because you want to go into training camp healthy, first of all.
Right.
Second of all, you want to get through training camp healthy. And then third, because it's the first part of the season, which is training camp, those 3 days or 4 days. And then there's the second season, which is, all of the, the preseason games that you play. And then you kind of have a back end where you go back to training camp to get ready for the season. These guys all understand that. The young guys and the veteran guys understand that that's a big task at hand, and you have to prepare your mind, your body, and your soul for that.
Yeah, I think about this in just kind of a habit building kind of way, especially for younger players, right? I forget who I heard this from. I think it was an assistant coach at some point, but players tend to eat healthier in the off season than they do during the regular season, because during the off season, you've got time at your disposal, you've got control over your environment.
Yeah, you're burning 5,000 calories a day too.
Well, I was gonna say, when you're so tired on the road, you don't have your normal restaurants and your kitchen and everything that you're used to, your own fridge. You're like, let me just go grab the fastest thing that I can get.
Exactly. Whatever I can get quickly and I can get to bed immediately. That's kind of the cadence. But in the off season, you've got control over your environment. And so you start to build these habits of, okay, I'm going to start prepping for this, or maybe I'll have this for dinner tonight. And then also, how's that going to make my body feel, right? And so you kind of get to learn your body, but also, the things that fuel your body and what helps you in the long run.
And that's the difference between veteran players and young players. The younger players are still trying to understand that part of the game, how important fueling up before game, post game, how important getting rest. The veteran players, they already know that. They're basically saying, all right, look, you know what? I've got to, decompress my mind right after the season. I've got to get all the inflammation out of my body over the next couple of months before I start my training regimen. And it's like they're almost like marching, like a like they're going to war again, and they're preparing for battle, and they have it set out. And that's why you see guys a lot of times, in their 19th, 20th season, like LeBron James. That's no joke. I mean, it's remarkable that he can still play at that level because of things he did way back in year 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s, where some of our guys are right now.
Yep.
I mean, just thinking about a guy like him, the physicality, right, that you have to play with and to be able to withstand that much time. And that word physicality is something that Thunder general manager Sam Presti talked about at the end of the season, that he wanted to see this young group get more physical this summer. How do you actually practice that? How do you become a more physical player over the offseason when you're not in these 48-minute games?
It's a good question. I think Mark answered it for me a couple of times last year when he talked in post-game talks with the media about how, it's a mindset.
Yeah.
And I think, letting it go in practice, letting a little bit more contact than normal, let the player get mad. Like Lawson, you and I playing one-on-one.
For sure.
Every now and then I'm going to hammer you because I'm an 80s, 90s guy. But
See, I'm not getting to you on the block. That's the thing. I know better than that. I'm not letting you
ISO, space out.
Yeah, more low.
But you let that play out, though.
Yeah.
All right, that's just how, we're going to let that play. It might be a foul, when the whistles and the strikes show up. But right now, we're going to let that play out.
Right.
I think a lot of coaches used to do that, and they used to do it with me too.
Right. Even
though I was a bigger player coming in the league, they used to just say, "You're a rookie. You can't call a foul." And I would go. He grabbed my arm, and I said, "That dude pushed me." And the coaches would look at me. I didn't see it. And I learned to just play through the
That's
contact.
a foul 3 years from now, Mike.
Exactly. Exactly. And Mark has talked about that, about the mindset of playing physical.
Right.
I don't think you need to go out there and attempt to play physical. You just have to put yourself in a mindset.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't when I got the basketball, I go to the basket, I get hit, I score the bucket, okay, no problem. If I get hit the next time, I don't score the bucket, I'm not looking at the officials.
I'm not waiting
Right.
for a foul.
Yeah,
I'm not
exactly.
expecting a foul.
For lack of a better word.
Right.
And that's that mindset I think Mark talked about last year. And I really like that because he was really starting to develop that kind of what I would call attitude in the team. Like, okay, we're just going, because one while, you remember during the season, they were letting so much go on.
Yeah.
I go, wait a minute now, last week that was a foul and possibly a flagrant one. And now no whistle.
And that's why the moment of truth moniker that we've talked about here is so crucial, because you got to be first to the floor. You got to be vertical at the rim. You got to stick your nose in there, because some nights maybe they're not calling it.
Right.
And you got to be Johnny on the spot.
Yep. All right. One last thing I want to ask you, Mike, before we transition here. So training camp is when that's show and tell, right? You get to show and see what everybody's been working on in the off season. Was there a off season or a regular season where you were particularly proud of the work that you had put in that summer? Was there a time, or one of your teammates even, where you were like, could actually see and physically see the work that they had put in that off season?
Wow. I got a really good one for you on this one.
Okay.
After year 3, there I am. I'm talking about that year 3, 4 moment. After year 3, my contract was up. I was done with my rookie contract, and I was having problems with the team negotiating a new deal.
Right.
So I ended up missing all of the stuff I missed all of training camp. But I'm going to take you back into the summer. I had already said, all right, man, I'm going to work my tail off, and I'm going to come into training camp in the best shape. I can't control the contract stuff because that's between, my agent and the team, but I'm going to work. And I got into great shape, and I did not even go to training camp. I went the last day, but it was the work that I had put in that summer that when I started that season with no training camp, I hit the ground running, and that turned out to be the year I led the NBA in rebounding without a training camp.
Wow.
Because of that time I had put in, not knowing that I was going to sit out the entire summer and training camp. But that's how it goes sometimes. So back then, but for me, that was like a defining moment.
And that didn't convince the coaching staff to slim down training camp right there.
One day training camp from here on out.
It wasn't like I was missing it because I was like going, man, this NBA game is hard. We were in training camp sometimes for like 10 days.
Yeah.
And we would go 2 days for a week straight. I could barely walk. So it wasn't like I was crying when I was a free agent. I knew I was going to get signed, but I said, look, you know what? I'm just going to run the beach. I'm going to swim. And I came into training camp in great shape. And I missed all of a training camp, but I had my best season.
Sign me up for the Michael Cage training
exactly.
camp.
I love it.
I know a lot of players are going to say that may not be the Atkins or keto, but this is the Cage thing.
Yeah. I have one more question for you, Mike. There's all this talk about improving in the offseason and what you're doing to improve your game. And a lot of times I think players and fans think about like expanding your game, doing these things that you haven't done on the floor the previous year. But I think a lot of the Thunder's mindset is actually improving within the role that you're going to have with the team. That was such a huge focus at Summer League, was like, a guy like Aaron Wiggins.
Right.
The shots that he was taking were much quicker in terms of catch and shoots than they were the previous year. Those decisions were so much faster. The ways that Jeremiah Robinson Earl was playing was not like outside of how he played last year. It was just better. So how do you focus on how do you avoid the temptation, should I say, of, putting all this time and energy into things that maybe look more glamorous or more scintillating, but, eschewing some of the things that would actually get you on the floor for more minutes in a team structure?
Well, I think, Nick, first of all, it's really, when you talk about how the NBA game is a positionless basketball, that can really, what does that mean to a player coming in, right?
That's a good point.
Like, what does that mean? I have to play all 5 positions. I have to know all 5 positions. I have to, be able to defend all 5,
Have the skill set of all 5 positions.
The skill set?
Yeah.
I mean, my goodness, I couldn't imagine coming in with that, trying to figure that out. You may as well try to figure out the Rubik's Cube in 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Quicker than you can figure that out. I know you don't know the Rubik's Cube, do you?
I can't solve it, but I know it.
They say,
I'm just checking.
They say paralysis by analysis, right? If you have so many options at your disposal, it's too many to choose from.
It's overwhelming.
It's like when Maddie and I try to figure out what we're going to eat for dinner at night. There's too many options. We're like, we can't decide. What are we going to do?
Let's just call the whole thing off.
Exactly.
So I think, that's the answer to your question, Nick. I think it gets guys to just say, all right, let me focus on being right here, this position, and understanding, that position or those 2 positions, and not trying to figure out 3 positions and 4 positions and 5 positions, basically, because, you can always get a lot better if you're a young player at the position that you're in, but that could change. If there's an injury, if there's a player that's unavailable, all of a sudden, you have to understand that. But I think for our team, as young as we are, I think it's a great plan where it's not a lot of pressure to try to figure out, we'll throw you in this uncomfortable environment, as Mark has mentioned, down the road. But for now, let's just work on this. JR, just work on, taking the 3 when it's there, moving the basketball, moving your body when you don't have it. Baisley, continue to attack the rim. Add that to your, which is something he added last year that he didn't have the year before. Lou Dort, continue to knock down threes. Yeah. You became one of our best 3-point shooters. Shea, be Shea, handle the basketball, be that point forward, be that go-to guy, continue to move the basketball and trust in your teammates the way he did last year.
I think Jeremiah Robinson Earl is a perfect example of what you're talking about here, where the Thunder can have a positionless style, but not ask each one of its players to be positionless, right? So the positionless things that you're asking Jeremiah to do is grab the ball off the backboard and make a few dribbles up floor and, at least just initiate the offense on that very first pass, right? Not have to make that outlet pass. What you're not asking him to do is run as a point guard, a pick and roll action and attack and try to make a play that way. What you're asking him to do is some of these maybe things on the margins that just help your team function a little bit more smoothly and quickly earlier in the shot clock without sacrificing kind of the core things that you're going to ask him in the game. Pick and pop, short roll, offensive rebound.
It adds some fluidity
Yes.
to the offense so that you're not responsible for one thing. Somebody else is responsible for the next thing. Everything can kind of overflow and overlap, but each guy doesn't have to do every single thing on the floor. I see what you're saying. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All this talk about the offseason makes me think of something that has stuck with me ever since my college days, and it's a quote, and it says, "There will come a time when winter asks you what you've been doing all summer long." And these guys, I know these guys have been working really, really hard. And after talking to Michael Cage, I expect a lot of good things coming into this training camp. We're going to take a short break right here, but don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
COOP Ale Works is the proud sponsor of Thunder Basketball Universe. Brewers of the fan favorites F5 IPA and 99-calorie Ice Chest IPA. You'll find those and many more COOP beers at retailers across Oklahoma. Learn more at coopaleworks.com.
Before we wrap up this podcast, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the loss that the NBA endured this weekend. The NBA family lost a giant, both in stature and in legacy. Bill Russell passed away this weekend at the age of 88, 11-time NBA champion, but is known for so much more than that off the floor. And I love that all three of us are here together because I think we all approached our perspective of Bill Russell in very, very different ways, different times. And so I just want to kind of go around and talk about what legacy and impact Bill Russell had on you.
Well, Mike, I think you should go first because, you know, as a former player and, you know, somebody that has benefited probably more than the three of us for what the legacy that Bill Russell laid out as a player and as a man. Just your thoughts on Bill.
Well, first of all, you know, Bill Russell was one of the few pioneers left that we can actually say changed the game and changed it in more ways than just on the floor, but off the court through his social justice commitment, civil rights marches right along Martin Luther King, his demeanor, being able to go out there and do what he did and do it like nobody else could under those conditions. Because I read his book, which is, you know, the autobiography of Bill Russell. I think there's like 10 different ones, but I think this one was by Murray Nelson. It was really, really, I read it about 15 years ago, and it was so powerful in his own words, how he said what he went through as a player. I couldn't imagine because, you know, I only knew Bill Russell as this behemoth of a player that was unstoppable, that really, you know, was the anchor for all those Celtic championships. And, you know, we don't always give him the, I think, notoriety that we talk about with Wilt Chamberlain because Wilt was such a scorer. And we all love scoring. He had the
numbers and the stats.
Exactly. He had the numbers and the stat. But, man, Bill Russell, man, when you look at him and the impact he had on the game, he dominated the game for a long time without scoring. Come on, man. I'm a former NBA rebounding champion. Let me tell you something. If you can average 22 rebounds in any level of basketball, high school, college, or pro, which he did for his entire career.
Without being 7'2".
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, which was, you know, unbelievable to me, you know, back then, what he, you know, the numbers he put up. And, you know, the 12 times he was an all-star. You know, he only played 13 seasons, but he won 11 championships as a player and coach. You know, he did things that we are starting to understand now. And I got to mention this one thing. When you hear about the Players Association and the impact they have on the community and what they've been able to do in the past 20, 25 years of the association, Bill Russell was the one who instigated that. They were going to boycott the 1964 All-Star Game, Jerry West, Oscar Robertson, and Bill Russell, because they wanted to be recognized as a union. And at the time, that was unheard of, man.
Right.
I'm talking about, it was like, no, there are no unions here, not in sports. So he went out on that limb when he didn't have to, because he was already one of the most popular players, along with Jerry West, because you remember Jerry West is the logo. If you look at that logo of the NBA, that's him. And Oscar Robinson, what do we need to say about here? We all have a close relationship with Oscar Robinson and the numbers he put up and what Russell Westbrook was able to do in a Thunder uniform. So, you know, he stood up and for the players because the union was there to protect the players that were not the superstars at the time, the Bob Cousy's, all these legends of the game back then, the Wilt Chamberlains, they were all okay. But Bill Russell said, no, we need this. We want this for players to protect all the players on his team. And what I liked most of all was how his teammates spoke of him. They said, Russell always looked out for me. He always, he was always, in fact, Don Nelson said his rookie season, Bill Russell had him over to his house for Thanksgiving and Christmas. Okay. And back in the 50s, you were talking, a black player and a white player. So he really was that type of a person. And people spoke about him like that. Jerry West spoke so beautiful about how he was such, he had this imposing look where he would, before the game or a break in the action, he would stand there like this and cross his leg. He said that was the most intimidating look he had ever seen, because he knew that Russell came to play. And it was really just, some wonderful things to hear people say about him, and, especially when we knew Bill Russell when he was alive, but really when he died last weekend, I think the whole world started to realize, what a special person he was.
I thought about Bill in two kind of different camps. Him as somebody that on the court we'll probably never see again. He was a player coach. I don't know if we'll ever see that again in NBA history. Won 3 championships as a player coach. And this goes to your point, Michael. I watched one of his post-game interviews after they won one of those titles. And the entire time he's talking about my guys. It's all about my guys. It's all about, they play so hard for me. And I'm thinking, you played hard too. You were out there too. And so I just, that's just, we can talk about all of his accolades but I think that is one of the things that will make him just unrepeatable as a player. But then the other thing that you have to think about is Bill Russell, the American, right? Yeah. This is a guy that moved with his family during the Second Great Migration during World War II from the Deep South to San Francisco area, becomes this, rising prospect, plays for the University of San Francisco. Paris, I know you're going to touch on this in just a minute, but they win 2 national titles. He becomes the 2nd overall pick in the NBA draft, actually kind of a funky draft where there were territorial picks back in the day. And then has this incredible career that doesn't just stay on the basketball court, but goes further into public life, like you're saying. And as an American, not only this incredible story of the American dream and how somebody can, go from one lifestyle to a different one, but also how being a patriot means, wanting your country to be the best that it can be. And I think Bill Russell was very vocal and put his money where his mouth was in terms of that as well.
At a time where it was not popular to do so, and there was a lot more for him to lose as a player, as a family man, and as a person, a black person during that time. And I think back to it, and obviously my perspective of Bill Russell, he was just among the Mount Rushmore of NBA greats, right there next to Wilt Chamberlain and Kareem. Like, those are just the figureheads of NBA basketball for me growing up, and the ones who influenced the greats that I watched regularly. And I only knew really that side of Bill Russell growing up. And it wasn't until this past weekend that I really uncovered and dove into just how important of a figure he was in pioneering being an activist and a player, being outspoken as an activist, as a player, and how that influenced and really paved the way for players today, athletes today, to be able to use their voice and their platform to make a change and make a difference. And so that was a really, really inspirational part of the story about Bill Russell that I really, really enjoyed learning about. One other interesting factoid that came about during this time of research, it came from our very own Mayor David Holt. Shout out to
thank you, Dave.
Mayor Holt for this information. He put out a tweet thread that I found so fascinating. There is a connection between Bill Russell and Oklahoma City, and it took place at the Municipal Auditorium here in Oklahoma City back in 1954 when he was a sophomore at San Francisco. He was playing in the all-college tournament. That's what it was called back in the day. Played against George Washington. And the head coach at that time, one of his former players at George Washington, was the one and only Red Auerbach, who was the head coach of the Boston Celtics at the time. And so even though I think they lost that game, I think San Francisco lost that game. I may have been wrong.
No, San Francisco beat George Washington.
No, never mind.
Yeah,
they beat him handily.
Yes.
Never mind.
Yeah.
Misremembered that one. But the head coach of George Washington at the time got a little insight on this exciting young prospect, Bill Russell, who really did some work in that game and gave that intel to his former player at Boston and played a key role in Boston actually selecting Bill Russell in that draft.
Yeah, traded. They I gave up a lot. I
It
think
came
to
by
trade.
way of a trade.
Yeah,
didn't it?
traded
trade.
with Atlanta, I believe.
Yeah, and the first overall pick was a territorial pick, Tommy Heinsohn.
Tommy Heinsohn. Yep.
And he was the second pick in that same draft, too. Keep in mind, Elgin Baylor
Yeah.
was in that draft along with him. So, I think when you look at the legacy of Bill Russell, you look at the different perspectives that we all have here today,
Right.
speaking about him. When I saw him as a player, when I was playing in the league, I used to just stop and just look at him because I knew who he was. My dad used to say, "Come here, son, sit on my knee, watch this guy, Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain battle." And I said, "Well, Dad, this game is like 10 years old." He says, "But you got to watch it. This is basketball." And he used to always make me watch it, because I was, when he was playing, I wasn't even born, when he first started. So I had such a connection between him, Bill Russell, Wilt Chamberlain, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Because you got to remember, back in those days, the giant players,
Yeah.
the players were big, and
Yep.
they built teams around the big center in the middle. I mean,
Right.
the first real superstar in the NBA was George Mikan, who was a 7-footer, dominated the game. And then the players came along like Bill Russell, who he was just one of a kind. He could run the floor, he could catch lobs, he could shoot. He was on a team we had great shooters, but he believed in the concept of team. And that's why they won so many titles, because he was willing to defer. Come on, man. You know that Bill Russell could have easily averaged 25, 30 like Wilt.
Yeah.
But he didn't. And that's the kind of guy he was. He was always willing to use and believe in his teammates, and he did that to a T, and he left a legacy that still I'm scratching my head when I find, because every time I research Bill Russell, I find more and more things that are remarkable about him.
He marched in the March on Washington with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., boycotted a preseason game with a few of his teammates because of racism that they encountered in the South. And I just think about that, and I'm like, that was in the 60s.
Yeah.
I mean, there weren't a ton of protections.
It was a bold move.
Yes.
And he believed in, his teammates. His teammates believed in him. He realized that this game, in order for it to grow, it has to expand. And they wanted inclusion, and they wanted to be accepted. And what I like most of all is that his teammates backed him up on that.
Yeah.
And I know Bob Cousy was hard on himself, because Bob Cousy said, "I could have done more to stand up to help." No, he did. He did exactly what he was supposed to do. He supported Bill Russell, and Bill Russell stayed humble.
Yes.
You never
He
hear
did.
about him
He did.
like get into an altercation.
Well, I was just about to say, you never see him self-congratulatory. You never see him with like a chip on his shoulder about the new generation. I mean, he was at every All-Star, he was at NBA Finals. He was like always there to celebrate the guys that are currently playing in the game, and never trying to heap credit on himself or to complain about the past or complain about the present. Just there to be this great supporter.
That's why when David Stern, who was a NBA commissioner for 30 years before Adam Silver, he probably talked to Bill Russell, "Hey, I want to name the NBA Finals trophy after you." And I got to believe that Bill Russell, being the humble person that we know him, no, don't do it. Just name it somebody else.
Pass.
But I got to give, David Stern, really credit for just saying, this is, we have to recognize this
It's the
man
right thing to do.
and what he did. And then making that Finals MVP trophy named after Bill Russell. And he has given that trophy out, I can't remember the last time someone didn't pass out that trophy.
Yeah.
Right on up till this year.
Right.
So it was really, we were treated to a very special So not only athlete, but human being as well.
Absolutely. And he will be remembered for so much, not just on the court, but off the court as well. So that wraps up today's podcast. But one last thing before we let you go. We promise you got one more thing. It's what's on tap for the Thunder. And actually, if you go to OKCThunder.com, you'll be able to find a pretty awesome feature story written by our very own Nick Gallo on our very own Jalen Williams.
Well, this is off of the one-on-one interview that Paris did in Las Vegas with Jay Will. So major, more than an assist. I would say, like, you got the ball.
Just an assist, yeah.
You put the ball up on the backboard, and I just, like, I tapped it in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
You didn't dunk it in?
It was one of those.
No dunk.
It was one of those Michael Cage putbacks. Exactly. No, it's a incredible story, and Paris, you uncovered some great things with Jay Will about his journey to the league. I'd love for you to share a couple of those stories about Jay Will's father, Michael.
Yeah.
And Mike, you may be able to relate to some of these stories as well.
Well, and they're from Arkansas, so there's a connection there.
Yeah.
But one of my favorite stories.
I like him already.
He's a great guy. One of my favorite stories. So Jalen Williams and his dad have a great connection. And Jalen Williams' dad actually played basketball in Arkansas as well. Great basketball player, encountered some injuries along the way and has sustained a few injuries just as an adult as well. Jalen, as we have all seen, very big guy, very solid forward. He can hold his own down there. Really kind of amazing that he's out here taking charges as big as he is. But when he was growing up, his dad would put him through workouts, really try to rough him up a little bit. And one day they were working on Jalen's spin move under the rim. And his dad had one of those pads that you bump guys with. And so Jalen went down pretty ferociously, hit that spin move, hit it so hard that he knocked his dad's shoulder out of place. And so his dad had to walk off the court, walked off to the baseline a little bit, and then just popped it right back in place, picked up the pad, and said, all right, let's go. Back to it. And I heard that story, and I was like, well, that makes sense. Now it all makes sense why toughness is the word that describes Jalen Williams so clearly.
Yeah, so on Thursday, the article in the one-on-one will be out on OKCThunder.com. The article is called Broken Backboards and Body Bruises. I'll leave you wondering about the broken backboards part. You can obviously tell where the body bruises came from.
King.
The one other story that I wanted to share, and it goes to show why Jay Will is one of the Thunder's draft picks this year, going back to this positionless style. I called his high school coach, and he shared a story about how in the state tournament, Jay Will's high school team came up against a team that they had lost to twice previously in that season that employed a full court press. Well, Jay Will's guards, his team's guards were getting a little flustered by this full court press. So at halftime, Jay Will's coach says, Jay Will, you got the ball. You're bringing it up floor. You're the one that's breaking this press. I got 5 timeouts. They're all yours. And so to give a guy who's 6'10", 250 pounds, that type of responsibility to just go out and be the playmaker, be the decision maker for the team. The guy who's playing center is the point guard. I think that goes to show the inherent skill level and the decision making prowess that this guy is bringing to the table for the Thunder as a second round pick. Michael, I know you got to see him at Summer League, so just before we go, any thoughts on Jay Will?
Well, first of all, I think he's got a high IQ for the game. I mean, I just watched how he was spacing himself on the floor. I was really pleasantly surprised that he was knocking down the three in that environment, because Las Vegas is a big-time environment.
Yeah.
And the other thing is what you brought up. Boy, that's a tough one to do, is taking a charge for a big guy, because we're always tempted to go in and want to block the shot. Or, unfortunately, many times for young players, we end up fouling the guy.
Right.
But I saw him take some textbook charges. His agility on the floor, the ability to get up and down the floor, really impressive. Because if you're a 5 guy, which he was, in that spot, most of the games in Las Vegas that I saw, if that guy is running hard up and down the floor, and that's supposedly your slowest guy, boy, it's going to be tough to stop a fast break. When he can start the fast break, like what you brought up about the story from high school, that he can actually put the ball on the floor, get around a few guys, break in the press, and then make a pass.
Yeah.
Because anytime you can get a guy, which is what I tried to do, because Norm Nixon, point guard for the Lakers, who I played with in Los Angeles, used to always tell me, Cage, if you can just take a few dribbles, he says, and get me the ball, I don't have to work so hard to get the ball up the floor because we want to run. But if I have to come back and get it from you, the break is done.
Yeah.
And I said, I get it. So and that's what he reminds me of.
Yeah.
He can take that dribble. He can take more than a few dribbles
Okay.
and get down the floor with the basketball, which is really going to be fun to watch next year.
A couple fun facts. J. Will led the NCAA in charges taken last year. Also became the first player of Vietnamese descent drafted in the NBA draft. So all sorts of good nuggets in Paris's one-on-one interview that you'll see on video form, and then the article that I wrote as well.
Be sure to check that out at OKCThunder.com for all of the context and insight that you need to know about Jalen Williams before training camp begins next month. But until then, thank you so much for watching and listening. Be sure to like, rate, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Thank you so much to our special guest, Michael Cage, for joining us today, and to our producer, Matt Bishop. And until next time, Thunder up, and catch you later.